So, in my time as a spin instructor at Tru Ride, Yvonne rode like 90% of my 6 a.m. classes. So, that meant a lot. And right now, she is working for Spinco, which is one of the fastest growing franchises in Canada, which is really exciting. So, I think you'll enjoy this conversation, especially if you like spin. Welcome to the Lifestyle Chase, Season 2. This podcast features high performers who have found a way to live their best life while balancing their health, wellness, friends, and family. I'm your host, Chris Little. Let's get started. The Lifestyle Chase is brought to you by Yeg Fitness. Yeg Fitness is Edmonton, Alberta, Canada's healthy lifestyle community, creating and supporting active living for all. Check them out online at yegfitness.ca and on social media at yegfitness. Welcome to episode 80 of the Lifestyle Chase. I am joined by the one and only Yvonne Camus. How are you doing today?
Great. Congratulations on number 80. I feel very privileged to be able to chat with you on the 80th version of your podcast.
It's super exciting. What's the weather like where you're at right now?
Well, so I'm in Blue Mountains in Ontario, and we got, I think it was about 11 inches of snow yesterday. So it's definitely winter. Very, very winter.
Yeah, the forecast is calling for a lot of snow for Edmonton, so I'm sure we'll be in a very similar boat very, very soon.
Yeah, well, my experience for my 4 winters in Edmonton was that there's no avoiding the winter. It's gonna come, so enjoy.
So when you were kind of based in Edmonton more, what was your way to be like at the top of your game, having to commute so often, so frequently, going back and forth, all these plane flights? Like what kept you grounded? What kept you motivated? What kept you from going crazy?
Well, it's a great question because I think in the early years of my fitness career, I always used to shake my head at people that business people that were coming in and out of the gym I was based in, and they would talk about how their life was so impacted by business travel. And me in my naive youth, I remember thinking, how can that be a bad thing? Like, it's got to be amazing to be on a plane and see new places and travel. And now, in hindsight of my last, I would say probably 5 to 10 years of business with so much business travel, I have a whole new appreciation for the toil of travel. And so, when I look back on 4 years of commuting to Edmonton, and I was pretty much flying back and forth at least 3 times a month, I would say. Originally, it was every week, and then I kind of ended up being able to spend kind of 10 days straight in Ontario and the rest of the time commute back and forth. And it's shocking, the toil, like the impact it has on your physical health is massive. I think primarily, mobility is just something I had never factored into, the way I had to think about my workouts or, I being an athlete as entirely through my youth and then even well into adulthood, I think the amount of just movement you create through workouts when you're training for a sport is so beneficial, and you don't even really think about that aspect of it. I think you think about the strength or the speed or the endurance that you're building, and really the best byproduct of all that training is just, great mobility, as long as you're training well and and have some balance with respect to muscle development and that kind of thing. But so I think it took me the entire 4 years of commuting to realize what a negative effect it had on my mobility specifically. And then that having a effect, like to your question of like kind of the mentality or the mental aspect around it, I just was so not used to and probably not really acknowledging for myself what that lack of mobility does to your kind of mental health, just because like when you're hurting, just moving around through daily tasks, and you're like, what's this? Like I remember really, I thought at one point, I thought, I should write a book about like, what is this? Like, what is this hip stiffness? What is this sore neck? Like, what is this little belly that I can feel when I'm doing my yoga? Like it was just such a weird thing to really experience, that shift of from feeling so fit to feeling not even like, I wouldn't say it was that feeling of a lack of fitness, because I think my cardio fitness was still fairly good. You know, like I rode your spin class all the time, and I love that feeling of a cardio workout. And, you know, I had a trainer, so I was doing strength training. And it was really a mobility issue. And when I think I was seeing a physio at one of our clinics, and she said, she did the math on it. And she's like, you are sitting either in a plane or in a car for, you know, an additional 16 hours a day with this commuting schedule, or sorry, 16 hours a week in this commuting schedule. And it really hit me. I'm like, yeah, like that's probably a massive shift from where I was at before, where I wasn't commuting. So, you know, I think in general, I'm probably like, I've been accused of being too positive. Like I have that positive outlook gene, I think. So even at the time, I wouldn't say it completely leveled me with respect to how I was feeling mentally, but it definitely was curious to me. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on.
That makes sense. I understand that. And I like that you brought up the positive outlook thing. I'm curious, in your career, when is a time when you being positive in every situation has backfired on you, and what did you learn from that?
You know, it has, I would say recently in my career, where I've seen it trip me up is I have a little bit of a tendency to not question things, because I just always believe that they're going to come out like that, you know, there's a force of karma, there's a force of, you know, putting out good things in the world brings you back good things. And I think in general, when you're with like-minded people, I think that's true. I've been a little surprised at times where I maybe go into things a little bit too naively, because I just so believe in the positive outcome that I don't kind of check on my blind spots and make sure that I'm kind of going into it with the same understanding that other people are. So, and specifically just with business contracts, I think I've had to get smarter with that, because if you put some kind of just blind positivity in place, there are people that just will take advantage of that because they just know you're so excited about something. Like, I think having so much enthusiasm and positivity is such a beneficial characteristic. It's certainly, you know, one that I lead with, but I've had to kind of tag along that, okay, like, you know, let me kind of dig into all the corners of this decision and think through it maybe a little bit more.
I like that answer. And I find that a lot of those decisions are based off of like our core values or whatever we want to call it. So if you could like list off things that are your core values, what would they be?
I probably would lead with honesty. I think I found even more so year after year that it seems to be a trigger for me if people aren't honest with me, whether it's for the good or the bad. Like, I think I've been surprised in business at times where people have that belief that a good lie is okay. Like if it's well intended, and I'm just more one of those people. And even if it's something people think I don't want to hear, I would rather hear it, because I get my backup if I feel like people aren't giving me all the information I need to make my decision and the decision I'm making. And so when there's either like what I think of as like a lie of omission or you know, that whole, I forget whose example it was, where they say like, you know, if your Aunt Agatha's coming into Easter brunch and her hat is hideous, does it serve anybody to be honest about her hat being hideous? Or like, is it better just for everybody to be not truthful and say it's lovely, and so I get that part of it, where it's like, if you feel like the truth is going to do more harm than a non-truth, where do you land on that? And so I get that whole like intentions being brought into the thinking behind how honest people are. I think where it affects me in business is where I see people justify to themselves not being truthful, because it's really easier on them than being straight up. And so that would be, I say, so I kind of lead with that. And I think it's because it's circled around me, whether it's been in that, I think like I've been told by a therapist I was honest to a fault at times. And that's an aspect that I have to consider, that perspective of, is honesty ever failing you? I don't know. I think that's a tough one to answer, but I do expect and support honest relationships. And I think especially in business. So that would be one of my core values, I would say. I think anyone who's ever worked with me would probably attest to the fact that hard work ethic, like being willing to commit more effort than the norm, is up there in my core values. And I think I've brought that into all aspects of my life. Like, I think you get surprised by, for example, like parenting. You get surprised by how much effort that takes, and then kind of that spread that exists between like so much of parenting and good parenting and supportive parenting. I think it just really comes down to time and effort, and not necessarily like I think like every new parent, I've probably read every book or, tried my best to understand the skills of parenting. And I've landed in a place after 3 boys of the fact that it really comes, a lot of good parenting comes around from the effort of wanting to be a good parent. So putting that effort in, and then the same with, relationships or work, like I think, or fitness. Like I think you and I both know so much about being healthy. And I think I like the term healthy rather than a description of just being fit. But I think that goal or that aspiration to have a healthy lifestyle there's just so much effort needed to do it. Like there's just a higher level of commitment because it's easier not to do so much of what it takes in that realm. And so, yeah, I'd put those two pretty far up there. And I think my other core value has always been just constant learning. I think that's probably, I always joke about the fact that I'm going to be the 85-year-old who registers for a university course or a new university degree, because I've just always loved learning. And that's why like I'm so happy to be doing this podcast with you today, because I listen to so many podcasts, and I think it's, the cool thing, we've been, exploring the whole world of adult learning with respect to our business, and trying to push out some modules for training with our team. And one of the cool things we discovered in that process is just, the growth of podcasts as a whole. One of the reasons is because you can learn while you're doing something else. So you can listen to a podcast and discover knowledge or understanding, or just like fulfill a curiosity, and while you're driving, right? So you're like actually doing something else. Like what, for me, I do it a lot while I'm out either exercising, like hiking or running or power walking or golfing, or, any of those things where you actually can listen and do something else at the same time. Whereas if you were studying a book or watching a video, you can't necessarily combine those two things. But I think with the reality of people's lives, and for me right now, I'm commuting from our home into downtown Toronto. So I have about anywhere from a 2.5 to a 4-hour drive if I'm doing that. And the fact that I can, utilize that time to feel like there's a capacity or opportunity to learn something has been amazing. Like it's just been phenomenal to discover. And I'm always asking people, so what's your favorite podcast? And what are you listening to? And the other thing I've discovered in that whole process as well is audiobooks, which again, like just for me, make the drive valuable, because it's actually time that I'm fulfilling that kind of, core value I have of just always being open to learning, anything more than what you've already learned.
I like that. I'm curious, what is your favorite audiobook recently?
I've actually, strangely enough, it's a fiction book that I just listened to, and I'm late to the party, but it was Where the Crawdads Sing,
Okay.
which has nothing to do with business, but I think sometimes even for me, I think much more so in my youth, I used to read a lot of fiction, and I think sometimes it's great to like just turn your mind off a little bit and let some of those things sink in. It's like just the idea of it not being about business.
Totally. And I mean,
But
like,
I am reading. Sorry, I was going to say I am reading. It's not an audiobook. I tried to download it in audio, but my father-in-law shared with me a book I'm reading right now called No Assholes, which I'm finding very helpful.
I think probably everybody could stand to read that book. There's a pretty good chance.
Exactly. And I think especially like we were chatting, a couple of minutes ago about this whole like, optimism, positive outlook kind of world, and how it and you asked me like how's it at times worked against me, or if I had to learn from it. And that's the reason for this book, is because of bumping up against someone who, you know, is not at all like that. And so I've had to kind of try to put it someplace, like, and try to figure out how I interact with that
Yeah.
type of different mentality. Yeah.
So in going through that process, like, I imagine there's going to be people that listen to this podcast that are like, "Oh, that is so relatable." What advice would you have for someone in a situation like that?
Well, I think, and I think it's more what I would share is what I tried to do for myself, and I think that's, I think everybody's different. For me, one thing was to explore it. Like I had to kind of mentally explore it, and I think that's where this book is helpful for me. I would say, people who are close to me and have worked closely with me know that I really have a lot of that never give up kind of attitude. And so for me, the go-to, even though it creeped into my mind to just, diverse myself out of the situation. So just like resign from it or move on from it, or, try to not have it to be something I had to figure out. And I could certainly, I think your automatic consideration is that, but instead for me, what I typically do and what I did was explore it, like kind of try to unpack it a little bit for myself and kind of figure out, what does it mean for me, and what does it take from me to create success in an environment that isn't necessarily my favorite space to be in. So that for me was a big thing, like just kind of and hence reading the book. I also recently was at a bit of a seminar where one of the speakers, it was out in Halifax, and one of the things she said really landed on me, because she said, like, when you're kind of in that trough of challenging or difficult times, moments, segments of your life, have somebody in your life that you can say to, like, this is what I would want you to know, is this is what I do when I'm well. So here are the things I do when I'm well, and well in my mind meant like not under stress, not like being affected by the negativity I was experiencing. And that, like, it just kind of popped open this little door in my brain to say, like, okay, I actually really need to explore that, because instead of spending too much time in that mental space of how hard it was interacting regularly with someone who was in a different kind of space and not in that positivity, optimistic kind of space I live in. So it made me pop open a little tunnel in my mind where I went, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to think more about what are the things I do when I'm well. And it kind of cultivated this return to really mindful yoga, where I could just kind of blow out some of that stuff that was sitting, because for me, mindful yoga is so much more about like a little bit of the meditation that goes on in that. And I do like morning meditations every day. And I think maybe that had gotten too routine, and it wasn't kind of clearing that space for me. So I went back to like a really mindful hot yoga class, and it was like, that moment where you kind of discover that little place that really seems to open your thinking a little bit. Um, so that was like, instead of getting rid of what was causing a lot of that stress and anxiety for me, I kind of went to a place more where I'm like, how can I understand this and the effect it has on me, and then how can I kind of blow it out a little bit better, so that I'm feeling better. Because I think the objective for me in that situation was, why am I like, I'm feeling badly all the time. I didn't think the person that was affecting me was feeling badly. It was just impacting me so much. So that's what I would share. I would share that kind of and both of those things, just, they weren't intentional initiatives on my behalf. They both kind of just fell into my lap. Like, I was kind of talking to my father-in-law a little bit about what I was experiencing, and he shared this book, No Assholes, with me, and then happened to be at this event out in Halifax, and the speaker just said those words, like, acknowledge to yourself and somebody else what you're doing when you're well, so that if they see you distressed, they can say, like, are you doing the things that help, keep you well? And both those things, like I said, they weren't my initiatives. They just kind of, it was that carpe diem kind of moment where it's like, oh, these things just happened to be put in my path to help. And they were certainly really helpful.
I like that. That's awesome. My next question revolves around leadership, because like, I did a bit of the research to like watch some of your motivational speeches, because you've got a lot of speeches up on YouTube, which is pretty awesome. If you could define leadership in your own words right here, right now, what would your definition be?
I think it goes hand in hand a little bit with what we just talked about with core values. But for me, when I've been capable of what I felt was good leadership, it was from learning more from the team than trying to instill knowledge on them. And, for me, my experience with when I've had great leadership, like when someone's demonstrated great leadership that I've been motivated to, to kind of grow from, it's when they really demonstrate that skill of like I call it followership, but that sense of knowing like when to be the person that has to be the one and only, versus being the one that's more like, okay, let me help you with your idea. Like, let me help you be successful with what you think is going to be a good decision here. And I think the other part of leadership for me, when I've experienced it and when I've been trying to be a leader, is knowing the value of encouragement and enthusiasm, like getting people excited and involved to me. So, in the past 5 years, I've walked in and taken over 2 different companies, both of which had large teams and a lot of diverse aptitudes and knowledge and desires. And my plan going into both of those was always freeze, unfreeze, freeze. So take the first 3 months and learn. Like, don't make decisions. Like, everybody thinks you go into an organization as a COO and it's like, oh, I'm just going to change everything. And whereas I had learned from a mentor in my career that it was much better to go, whenever you're going into a new situation, is don't make the changes immediately, because you don't know everything. And for me, that was so valuable when I came out to Edmonton. That was my strategy, and it was so valuable because I think people have far more buy-in if you've taken the time to try and understand and learn, versus just come in and think, okay, I know what to do here, and here's what we're going to do. So I would say that, like, really kind of being capable of scanning the landscape and learning from it before making all the decisions, and that sense of being able to kind of harness what actually one of my husband's phrases in his business world, he calls it group genius. But when you can harness that group genius, so if you go in and just start telling everybody what to do, it doesn't make people feel like they've had any value to that point. Whereas if you try and get everybody giving you their thoughts and understandings, you can form a much better perspective of that, and not go, like my experience has been, not to take the word of all the top dogs. It's more like you learn a lot. Like, for example, when I went out west, it was learning a lot from our reception team and our personal trainers about what their world was like versus what the executive team necessarily thought it was like. So
I like that.
that's where I would.
That's a good way to put it, and something that a lot of people would be able to relate to. We're going to go back in time a little bit, and I want you, if you can remember your high school experience, what was that like for you?
You know what? I would say generally I loved high school. My youngest is in high school now, and I was so worried for him going into high school in this day and age, because everybody says how hard it is. And it's wonderful to see that he's actually really liking high school too. I loved high school because I think primarily I think every sport that I could compete in high school, I competed in. Like, it just was like this amazing place where I, really found my footing as an athlete. And I'd been training as a competitive athlete outside of like school for years. And so to kind of go into school and have like that opportunity, I think sports for me was just an amazing venue for getting a lot of coaching, which I loved. And I think coaching, like we just discussed leadership, I think so many people like me who were involved in athletics, like your first real experience with leadership other than your parents, which sometimes is a weird dynamic of leadership. But I think the first experience you have of leadership is when you're probably coached by a high school athletics coach. And for me, that was like, I had so many different coaches and learned so much from them. And in that time of my life, I took my, like there's the Canadian level 1 coaching, and I did that, and kind of really wanted to get, that part of my life, just build that understanding. So, and I was, I think of myself as fortunate in the sense that I was, I had good grades, and I loved. And I think that when we talked about it earlier, my core values, like I loved learning. I loved being that sponge of, being able to take information in and understand it enough that I could, accelerate through school. So it was, I think of high school and university as just amazing times for me.
That's awesome. In all of the coaches and teammates that you've had, who are 3 that really stand out to you? Like, something that you'll just never forget about them, and why?
Well, the first one that pops into my mind is actually a coach in high school named Larry Archibald, and he was our basketball coach, and he was vertically challenged as far as a basketball player. Like, he was, but he had been a successful basketball player in his career, but he was like shorter than most of the girls on our team. But he really demonstrated and taught us to kind of learn that it was that if you were willing to put in the work in skill development, that you could be great at a sport. Like, he was kind of a walking testimony to that. And what he did for me is, like, because I was taller than most of the girls, like I'm kind of tall even still on a scale, and I always thought that would make me a great center, that I would like play that position because I was tall and I could jump. And he made me a point guard, and I remember just thinking, like, what are you doing? Because I really at the time thought that the playing center and doing all the like that kind of role of the start of jumping and winning the ball for your team and that kind of thing, that was kind of what was important in my mind. And he really shifted my understanding to being more about, point guard is a bit of the leader on the court. And, like, he worked really hard with me to develop my outside shooting. And just the fact, I think what he showed me was that he could see something that I didn't see, and through his belief in, the ability that I was coachable, that was going to be successful. So learned a ton from him. In hindsight, I would say the other high school coach, our principal, her name was Mrs. Nielsen, and she actually coached basketball as well. And she was in the mind of, a grade 11-year-old, she seemed like ancient. She was like, the principal that was, not young from my memory at that time. And I look back on it and I think like she was younger than I am now. And at the time I thought, like I had so much admiration for, she would come out and play basketball with us. And like at the time when you're a high schooler and your principal is playing basketball with you, that to me was just like, I loved her spirit of being able to say like, I'm going to get in the mix here. Like I'm not going to play it from the sidelines, play it safe from the sidelines. And that again was a good example to me, I think, even in business of like, I know a lot of business people who want to kind of, the description I would give is create more distance between themselves and some of the front line of their team or members of their team. And I think what I learned from her and her willingness to get in the mix was just that, like, even though she was, like she used to wear this like a tennis dress to play basketball in. And I remember all of us, kids on the team feeling like that was just so different. And yet at the same time, I look back on it now and I'm like, she didn't let things stop her. Like she just got in the mix, played, like got on the court with us. And that was an example to me that I've carried forward. And I think the last one would be when I was training for Eco Challenge, and I was an adult working full time. We had a coach that was probably the coach that most reached into that part of you as an athlete that's more mental and more kind of like he's the guy that if you've seen some of the videos of my speech, but I talk about in my speech because he really helped with that. Like 1 out of 10 workouts that, we're going to do together is going to be crap. Like it's going to be bad and you're going to hate it and you're going to doubt yourself. And he also brought in a sports psychologist that worked a lot with us. And he was a high caliber athlete himself, like, Olympic trials, world championships, all those kind of levels of paddling in his experience. So I think where he had gone with his athletic career, what he brought back and affected me with was that mental aspect, that ability to realize that you have to work on that part of your game. And I think, when we just talked a few minutes ago about where in my recent life needing to kind of figure my way out and understand some of the impact of a different situation for me, that probably came from that experience I had with that coach, where he was kind of like, if your cycling training isn't going the way you want it to go, it's not always necessarily because of what you're eating or how you're training. It can be in your head, right? Like, and you have to pay as much attention to fostering and feeding that part of your success formula as you do the other aspects of it, like the skill of an athletic endeavor or the training protocol for building endurance or like eating properly. Those things all matter. But what he really exposed to me was all of that can be perfect and you may still have a bad result or a crap workout. And so it's as much about understanding what's going on in your head in those times.
I like that. That's a good answer. It kind of got me thinking of the term pivot, because I find, especially within like the fitness space, there's so many instances where we pivot. And in that time, we don't necessarily know what we're pivoting for, but we just know that it's necessary. So I'm curious, for you, in your experience, what is a time when it occurred to you that a pivot was necessary, but you had complete doubt as to what was in the future, and like, how did that turn out? Like, what became of that situation?
That's a good question. When I think about pivoting for me, most often it's been when I've been working with someone and I'm not seeing the results that I would want, like either the work results, so the measurables aren't there, or just the interactions aren't feeling good. And I think for me, the hardest pivot I have to make at times is to the more harsh, or I don't even know if harsh is the right word. It's more kind of playing the heavy as a boss. Like, I would always prefer to get results by encouragement and collaboration and all those things that make us feel so good when we're working. And I'm challenged by people who will push, like really push the boundaries of our relationship. And so for me, sometimes to pivot into that, like, I have to play the heavy here. Like, I've got to refer to the contractor. I've got to, put the rules back in front of them, or, kind of snap the whip a little bit. That's probably my hardest pivot. And even after I do it and I know it's completely warranted, I'll chew on it for a long time, because it's so almost against the grain for me to have that kind of interaction with somebody.
That makes sense.
So when I do it, yeah, it really sits heavy with me when I have to. But I do see it, like I can see it at times where, I've tried every aspect of that part of the positive relationship that I like being a part of. And they're just sometimes I can see it, and I can see it so clearly. And it's like, okay, I have to pivot in this moment and be a little more like stiffen the backbone a little bit, and kind of take the hard leap into some of the hard conversations.
Yeah. I imagine in your career, you've probably met a lot of different people, had to make a lot of you've had to sort of assess a person and come up with a first impression assessment of them. And I know for myself, I've kind of got my my guidelines, my rules, all these things. But what about you? What is something that stands out to you when it comes to a first impression of somebody that you just think has a good positive essence?
What stands out about them?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was just having a conversation with the founder of the company I'm working for now, and we were chatting a little bit about some first impressions. And one of them for me is, I think I learned, someone said it to me a long time ago, probably a boss, and it was like, if someone's not at their best when they first meet you, if they put their, the most common thing is people want to make a good impression on you. So when they don't, and you can tell they're not, it absolutely doesn't matter to them what impression they're giving you of themselves, that one's an enigma for me. I really sit there and go, wow, this is because when you kind of think of, most times people, especially in employment situations or business situations where you're negotiating things, the initial contact, the overriding thing is to make it a positive initial contact. So when someone comes into that kind of situation with me and they present the opposite, it really it just kind of stifles me a little bit. I sit there and I go, wow, this is unusual, and what is going on? What's going on with this? So yeah, that one has probably tilted me back on my heels a couple of times recently. And I think it's a new business world out there. I think it's a new world. It's been so interesting to me in the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months, this whole sense of, of where I think people are far more in a space where they're like, I am who I am, and take it or leave it. I'm not going to put anything on here. There's no mask, there's no airs, you're going to get me like I am. And so, and in some ways, I can appreciate that, because then there's no surprises, right? You're not meeting someone and getting a first impression from them that's contrary to who they're actually going to be if you decide to, contract them or work with them or engage them in a business relationship. So that's, I think we're seeing more of that now in business than we have in the past, where there's not the whole, I'm not going to necessarily mold myself into like be the best first, give the best first impression I possibly can. If it's false or different in any way, I think people are coming more to the table at times with I'm just going to be real, and that is refreshing. But at the same time, it does present that situation where you're like, okay, now that I know this and I know this about them, what kind of relationship do I want to build with them? But for me, what my experience has been in the last 6 to 12 months is that it's helped me explore what different people and different personalities and different perspectives bring to the table. Because I think what I've seen oh, did I lose you?
No, I still got you.
What I've seen distinctly in business is that, as we empower people, and I think there's more empowered people have more personal empowerment, they're seeking more personal empowerment than ever before. And as we do that, I think what it creates is there's more friction in business. Like I've seen it at sitting around the table with large teams or a group of leaders, is that the level of friction that I see now compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago is distinctly different. And businesses today, I think, or even individuals today, we need to figure out like how to accelerate while there's friction, like to actually take it as, that whole, there's different perspectives, there's different understandings, there's different opinions, and the people feel very strongly about the right to speak their opinion. Whereas I think that was maybe a little muted before. So there's a lot more interactions around a boardroom table now that I see where there's disagreement. And so figuring out where do you pocket that, like being capable of disagreeing with people and still admiring them in business and still admiring that they're willing to say their piece and contribute their thoughts, and not take it or internalize it as much as I think probably we would have in the past. I think those skills on a leadership team or an executive team are really important because in my opinion, there's far more vocal expression and even personal expression of different, takes on life or work or decisions. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of, that I think different than I would have seen before.
That makes sense. When it comes to riding on a spin bike, what's the most profound moment that you've ever experienced?
Oh, I think about, like, I've spent so many hours on a bike, and truly probably one of the most impactful moments was when we did auditions for Tru Ride, because it was the first time I'd really been put into that world I'm so much a part of now, where, I think I'd been a part of spin classes before where they're inspirational, but they were different in that it was typically about taking on the hard work or, conquering a hill, like that kind of more mental toughness to make yourself go harder, which I understood from that world of athletics. And then when we started the auditions for Tru Ride in Edmonton, the discovery of this whole other place that people could go to on a bike that was so inspirational in a different way, because it was like cracking themselves open versus hardening themselves for a conquest of a physical nature. It was about, creating vulnerability, and that was really, really, really new to me. And, you were a part of those auditions. And I think so much of the crew that we brought on board at Tru Ride really exemplified their understanding of that. And in particular, I think you were there when Caitlin did, she did the segment of her ride where, for Tru Ride, it was that whole, like, more the kind of true, I forget what we called it, but the moment where we kind of darken the room.
True time.
Completely. True time.
Yeah.
And her first, like, do you remember when we were kind of in the in the stage where people were putting together a couple of songs for themselves, and she put together her True Time, and I bawled my eyes out on the bike, which I had never done before, ever. And it just was this experience of, this is, to me, the whole movement into studios like Tru Ride, or for me at the moment, Spinco, or what we've seen in, whether it's Cycle Bar or any of our other competitors, is I think that's what's attracted so many unique individuals who may never have found themselves on a bike in a studio working out, is the magic that's been created when someone, whether it's through, and I think it's an amazing combination of music and thoughts and expression, that someone can do that from the bike and crack you open, is amazing. So that's probably one of my most memorable moments on the bike.
That's really cool. I'll make sure that Caitlin listens to that part. So
I think she probably
I'm curious about your experience with Spinco. Like, what was your very first day like there?
Well, it was interesting because I had made the decision to move on from my role in Edmonton, and I had made the decision to come back to Toronto and not work for a period of time. You asked earlier about the what commuting was like, and it definitely has its toll on, as I mentioned, like not just your physical mobility, and I think that contributes to stress, but also I was away from my family a lot, so I had decided I was going to come back and not pursue another position for kind of at least a year. And through an acquaintance who's very good friends with the ownership group of Spinco, he contacted me and said, like, please talk to these guys. Like, I think it's the perfect thing for you. And so started talking. The first thing I did is went and wrote a class, and in Toronto, and it was amazing. And it was actually quite funny because I think it was like August, and it was, I don't know if you remember, but August was like a massive heat wave here in Toronto. And so I rode the class, and it was phenomenal. And I came out of the class red-faced and sweating profusely, and then quickly got changed because I think I rode 9:30 till 10:30, and then I was meeting with the ownership group at 11. So did the quick and transition change, and then I thought, I'll just walk up to the office, but it was straight uphill up to like Yonge and St. Clair in Toronto. So I walk into this meeting with the ownership and was like, could not stop sweating. Like I was just like, dripping. And it was so funny because they didn't know me from Joe, right? Like it was the first time they'd ever laid eyes on me, and I had been referred in through one of their acquaintances, but kind of spoke to the operating partner, and he described the business. It was founded by a 22-year-old girl in Kelowna, BC, Michelle August, who had just this, I think there were so many similarities in that she was a great athlete, and she had gone to university to play basketball, and she graduated and was really struggling to find a workout that fed the same kind of feeling she had when she was training athletically, and developed the method that Spinco uses. And it's just evolved through like just kind of the commitment and embracement of the brand of young women. And so most of our franchisees are, well, actually every one of them at this point is a young woman. And we help them, the company helps them a lot through the stages of getting their business set up and starting to run a studio. And so they had, I think at that point they had 8 studios, but they really needed kind of a fitness operator, like someone who understood the fitness business, and could perpetuate kind of that knowledge into operating really successful studios. And so I think it was curiosity that got the better of me, and which is typical for me a little bit. I'm always just like curious about, what could the possibility be if I joined their team. And so I kind of tried to say, look, I really didn't want to work with, I'll come on board in January, and they convinced me to come on board in October. So I had a few months off, which was nice. It was good to recoup a little bit and spend some family time, but kind of went in full speed in October. So it's just been a year. I've been with them, and it's really amazing. I'm proud of the business and what it's becoming and what the future holds for it.
In the last year, what's the thing that brought you the most joy when it came to working at Spinco?
Um, I would say it was a challenge for me in some of the aspects that we talked about earlier. Just when I came on board at Spinco, it was a very small, tight knit group that were a little leery of a stranger. A lot of the Spinco success has been built on people that start out in the business as a rider and then come on board because of their love of the brand and the experience. And so they've cultivated a team through people that have an experience with the brand, and then cultivate up through onto the bigger team. So it was a bit of a tough nut for me to crack, and just for me. And I think some of what we've talked about in this podcast, I really had to incorporate that sense of letting people be who they are within the team, and figuring out winning strategies utilizing that. And so that's I've loved the fact that at this point in my career, I've had a good long career in fitness, and I love the fact that I'm still learning things. Like this Spinco team has taught me a lot about what's really building, I think, this end of the business in our fitness spectrum. Like when you think about the spectrum of fitness businesses, I think what's really, the propeller behind Spinco's success is how passionate they are, and how just how much it means to them that Spinco is what it is. And so for me to be able to still learn so much about, how to harness the energy of a team and get it moving in a unified direction, it's been huge. It's been huge to spend a year kind of finding the footing that's really helped the business. I think I'm sure you saw we were the 30th fastest growing company in Globe and Mail's top 400, the only fitness brand in the awards, and we're really proud of that. But it's kind of it's like harnessing a wild horse, and so it's been great because you have all the energy accelerating you. It's just a matter of corralling it. So that's been huge.
In your time spending time with different people, different instructors, different leaders, you probably met a lot of people that just got their start. I want to know, what was the most purest impact that new person had on Spinco as a business, either at a local level or at a corporate level?
That's a good question. I think what's happening that I see at Spinco is we're attracting in a lot of people into the business that want to be a part of the success that Spinco's creating at the moment. And so that's bringing in some really committed, people who bring a level of commitment to wanting to have that in their life that I think is valuable. Where it presents a challenge at times is where they fit in, or how they can help the business as well. So, I think one of the things I learned when I was in Edmonton from Lululemon actually was their approach to their ambassadors. And it wasn't so much they weren't necessarily looking for people who were people who wanted to come on board and just simply get the free clothes or get the discount or get the credit. What they were really interested in is how is this going to better both parties? How is it going to better Lululemon to have you as a part of our team or our ambassador team, and how is it going to make a difference for you other than the benefit of saving some dollars? And so I think that's where Spinco's at the moment, is we're really being selective about our new partners, like our franchises, but we consider them partners, and really looking at it as like, what is this the best thing for Spinco and for this person? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. So it's not always just about how much they love the brand. It's also about, are they in the right place, and is Spinco in the right place to make this a mutually beneficial partnership? And so that's where I think people coming into with a lot of, like I said earlier, those different opinions and different outlooks, sometimes they're going to be beneficial and sometimes they won't.
That makes sense. In the last 7 days, what's the happiest moment that you've had? Just random, anything in life, just something that you're like, this is it. This is the thing.
I came back to Edmonton. I was back in Edmonton, as we chatted about, I think, before the podcast started. I flew back on a little bit of business, but padded it with pleasure, in the sense that I reconnected and got to see, just like, it's amazing to me. I built some really, really strong relationships when I was out there that are really important to me. And I go back to them mentally at times when I'm encountering different types of relationships in Toronto. So I probably had a need to come to Edmonton, and I got off the plane and I was walking up the ramp from the plane into the airport, and I had this massive wave of nostalgia, just like it had been like a year and some time since the last time I had been in Edmonton. And it just was the strangest feeling of, like, almost like the city giving me a hug. Like, it was like the city of Edmonton, giving me a bit of a welcome back hug. And that was just so, like, I remember just breaking out into this big smile of that feeling. Like, it was just really an interesting feeling for me.
Isn't that such a good feeling though? Like, I find in my life, I am in the pursuit of that feeling. Like, I try to surround myself with the people and in the environments where I feel that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the whole surround yourself with people that lift you up a little bit instead of beat you down a little bit. Yeah, for
So,
sure. And that's where we lean into it's almost like you need that, and then it's there and you lean into it, because it was like that for me. The weekend in Edmonton was a really great refresh.
I like it. With Spinco's growth and everything, and going around the country, like, you travel a lot. Like, do they have locations in Alberta at all?
We do not have any in Alberta, surprisingly. But like I said, we've been very calculated about our growth. So, and the really great one, the really great telltale things about Spinco at the moment is all our existing franchisees have already opened their second, or wanting to open their second, and now their third studios. So that's a path of growth that we're focused on for the next 6 months, is helping our existing franchisees expand the way they would like to. And then we are looking, we do have quite a pipeline of potential new locations. And so we're pursuing that. We just want to really pace it so that we are well platformed to make sure that every studio is successful. So we're taking our time a little bit, but I think we'll be accelerating in 2020.
I think that's a good strategy to have in just about everything in life. Just like understanding like what it takes to be in a good position, and what is necessary for like a strong team and all that stuff too.
Yeah, and for us, it's I think when you have a brand, that the experience itself, like, to me, it's different, us expanding locations in Spinco, than it would be necessarily for a Subway, right? Or like a Tim Hortons or something like that. Those are, like, for us, although the business is franchised, each location we really see as a reflection of the experience. And so to preserve that means making sure that it's the right partners, making sure it's the right people that can perpetuate that, and not necessarily like, we have a lot of requests and inquiries that are not the right fit for Spinco at the moment, because we want operators and partners who really want the brand to be what it is.
I think that's important to kind of like stay true to like your guidelines or your core values or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and it's, I think we're in a good, I'm very lucky because we're not being pushed hard by people in the back end to just make sure that it's the fastest growth, like that we just do more than that at the moment. So I think that it's a really good fit that kind of people from all sides of the business are on the same, or like in the same place with respect to how we're thinking about growth.
Awesome. I'm curious, what's the best piece of advice that you received in the year 2019?
Strictly in the year 2019, I think, for me, it probably wasn't a piece of advice as much as it was that moment of, are you doing what you should be doing when you're well? And kind of just recircling back for me in my mind, that whole understanding of, if it works so well, why'd you stop doing it? And for me, that was the aha moment of yoga. It was like, when I think back to probably what I felt was me at my best in my life, I was doing a lot of yoga, and surprisingly, it's not about the physical aspect of it. It was more about the place it served in my life for stress reduction, kind of being able to tame internal voices and just release a little bit into space that was quiet, as opposed to, like, because a lot of my life is highly charged, right? Like with kids and work and like Spinco or any kind of typical fitness environment, especially boutique, is a little bit highly charged, and that is amazing. But I realized that I had lost that place where I unplugged, and it was probably the best discovery for me of 2019.
I love it. So I have a question that I ask all of my guests, and it's, if you could give one piece of advice on how to authentically live your life to the fullest, what would that piece of advice be?
My piece of advice for that would be to lean into when you're 100% wrong. Like I heard a speaker years and years ago it was a comical moment in his presentation, but he spoke about when you're in a heated argument with someone, and usually someone you care about, and you have that mental, like, kind of almost just crack in the landscape where you realize, oh my goodness, I am actually wrong here. Like I'm like arguing from a place of being in the wrong. And, I think my piece of advice for anyone would be, when you have that aha moment of the fact that you're in the wrong, is, instead of taking it to the grave, lean into it and do everything. Like, what I've found is I've had to, in the last year, do everything to correct when I'm discovered myself to be in the wrong, more so than when I feel I'm in the right.
Basically just putting ego aside sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I even heard it recently on a podcast I was driving to, where they said, it's never too late to right a wrong. And, there's never a bad time to right a wrong. And that's, I think that's probably been impactful for me.
I love it. So I'm going to wrap it up. I feel like we could go on for 4 hours or something, but it's been a great conversation. And I'd like to thank you again for joining me.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations again on the success of your podcast, and of course all your fitness training. It's been amazing. I feel like I was there at the beginning of this whole journey for you, and I couldn't be more proud of what you've been capable of creating for yourself and all of the people you're impacting with your training and with your podcast. So congrats again.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.